Many times in previous videos in this series dedicated to examining episodes of my favorite classic 1980s action-adventure series, MacGyver, I've talked about how the show and its hero had a strong, unabashed social conscience. It's one of the things that set MacGyver apart from most of his equally schlocky but less memorable contemporaries. Despite usually being thinly plotted, outlandishly implausible nonsense, the show's heart was always in the right place, and its hero was an outspoken and dedicated champion of science, progress, and social justice. One of the ways the show's social conscience showed itself most frequently was through its environmentalism. In the parlance of the time, MacGyver was a tree hugger. And my atheist ass says God bless him for it. The world could have used more tree huggers 35 years ago when the episode I'm getting ready to tell you about first aired, and it could definitely use some more of them now, particularly in positions of power. Something for my fellow Americans to keep in mind for our midterm elections later this year, assuming we have those. Anyway, let's escape our bleak present day for a few minutes and go back to the bygone golden age of 1991, when the Cold War ended, the Terminator and Kevin Costner's Robin Hood ruled the box office, the Twins won the World Series, but Cal won the American League MVP, and many politicians and corporations still at least bothered to pretend to give a shit about not killing everybody. And let me tell you about this episode from season 6 of MacGyver. It's called The Wasteland. As we begin, MacGyver is driving a van through what looks to be a lovely patch of beautiful West Virginia sometime after the coal mine closed down. He stops at a sign identifying the place as a Phoenix Foundation test site and grabs an envelope taped to the sign with his name on it. In the envelope is a cassette tape and a note that says, "Play this while you drive." Oh, it's a self-guided audio tour. I hate those. Just leave me in peace to wander aimlessly and learn nothing. The voice on the tape belongs to the guy MacGyver has come here to meet. He recorded this little narration to keep MacGyver company on the arduous 3-mile drive from the sign to the guy's test lab, and to deliver some helpful exposition to us in the audience. This area was once thriving and healthy, but the local ecosystem was devastated by development, which polluted the land and the air and killed off most of the wildlife. Tape Guy's concern is that the same thing could happen again to another development site unless something is done to stop it. Before MacGyver arrives, we cut to the site of the tent where Tape Guy has his mobile test lab. He's out taking more readings on the ruined and contaminated landscape when, right in the middle of monologuing about the short-sighted carelessness with which humanity treats the natural world, he steps into quicksand and finds himself trapped. Fortunately, MacGyver drives up right then and hears Tape Guy's desperate screams for help. MacGyver rushes in to help, but Tape Guy says, "No! Stay out! It's too dangerous!" Well, then what the hell was he yelling at MacGyver for? He just wanted a witness to his death by quicksand? Oh, I get it. MacGyver's gonna MacGyver away to save Tape Guy's life. He goes, "Hang on, Willis." Tape Guy's name is Willis, good to know, and runs back to the van and starts pulling cable out of the winch in the front. Boy, those front winches are so useful. Why don't they come standard on all vehicles? Anyway, once MacGyver has pulled out enough slack, he wraps the cable around his waist, activates the winch, then runs out and manages to get a grip on Willis just as he sinks into the mud. The winch picks up the slack and drags MacGyver and Willis to safety. After they wash off, Willis worries they might melt otherwise, and MacGyver's not really clear if that's hyperbole or a literal possibility. Willis shows MacGyver a presentation on the proposed Bartlett city development that he's prepared on videotape. An audio cassette for the drive to the site, now a videotaped presentation. This Willis guy must have been an AV nerd in school, huh? I'm not casting judgment. I'm just observing. Maybe he does it to keep busy. If all he does is live in this tent and do soil tests all day, that's probably pretty boring. You can only jerk off so much. Willis's little first-year animation project explains that the Bartlett City development is going to be built atop a confined aquifer, which means that the water won't be replenished by an outside source as it's used up. That will result in the depletion of groundwater, destabilization of the soil, accumulation of pollutants and toxic materials, and eventually not only the Bartlett City development, but also the nearby town of Maple Ridge will be rendered uninhabitable, and eventually the whole area will look like this place, a wasteland. The tape ends and MacGyver turns to his friend like, "What you talking about, Willis? The EPA did a study of the development site and they didn't think anything like this was gonna happen." Willis is like, "Yeah, but the thing is, I'm right and the EPA is wrong. So you need to go talk to Mr. Bartlett and convince him to reevaluate his environmental surveys to avoid another disaster like this wasteland." Well, sure, this Mr. Bartlett is planning to build a city named after himself. He's probably a reasonable, open-minded guy. Cut to Old Man Bartlett meeting with his two kids. There's Laura, the smart one, apple of her dad's eye, and there's Scott, the fuck-up who doesn't have a chance in hell of ever inheriting the family business. Bartlett wants to know what this appointment with MacGyver is about, and the kids advise him that he'd better take it seriously, since MacGyver works for the Phoenix Foundation, which is trusted by the public. Bartlett's a little stressed about a big meeting later with some investors, so he takes it out on Scott, berating him for his appearance, like, "Why are you dressed like that? This is an office. Formal attire. When I was your age, I had to wear shitty clothes like that. And what's with your hair? When I was your age, I had to look like a member of Flock of Seagulls, but I sent you to the best schools so that you could be better than that. So start acting like it. Get yourself a more modern, stylish hairstyle, like that Vanilla Ice." Laura volunteers to handle the MacGyver meeting for Bartlett, and she and Scott exit to talk strategy. Apparently, Laura and Scott are secretly plotting against their father, who Scott blames for killing their mother. He didn't murder her or anything. Apparently, she died of alcoholism caused by what a shitty husband he was. Laura's having second thoughts, though. No matter what a bastard he is, he's still their father. Scott has no such sympathy. He and Laura know the truth about the Bartlett City development, how it's destined to become a disaster area, and Scott wants to use that knowledge to force their dad out of the company and take over. How Shakespearean. I love when MacGyver plots riff on Shakespeare. MacGyver and Shakespeare have so much in common. They're both in English. They both have a character whose name starts with Mac. Practically the same thing. MacGyver shows up for his appointment and meets Scott and Laura at the development site. Laura rushes Scott off to take care of something ahead of the big investor reception. Then she asks MacGyver what he wants. He says it's about the environmental study on the site, and Laura goes, "Oh, an enviro head." Like, is that a thing people say, or used to say, about environmentalists? I've never heard that other than in this episode. Did people use that term to make fun of environmentalists? I think we should start a recycling program. Piss off, you dipshit enviro head. Is that something that's ever actually happened? Their conversation is interrupted by a phone call from Scott, who is calling from his fancy rich guy car with its fancy rich guy early 90s mobile phone to ask if MacGyver is going to be trouble. Laura's like, "Yep, think so." Scott says, "Then the plan is on." Laura agrees to watch Willis's dipshit enviro head tape that MacGyver brought along, and then they can talk about it over lunch. Cut to Mac and Laura having lunch at the hippest joint in Maple Ridge. Laura has watched the tape, and she admits that it's pretty scary, but denies that their development will result in anything like Willis's wasteland. She points to the company's own environmental studies, which say the development is good to go. Mac says that their internal studies are obviously flawed because the data is clear. The Bartlett City development will deplete the aquifer and ruin the land. Laura's like, "Man, every time we turn around, there's someone with a new environmental theory making life difficult for business." MacGyver says, "You know it's probably bad for business? Building a city where there's not enough water." Yeah! Checkmate, Laura! Building a city where there's not enough water is a terrible idea. The well-known filmmaker and convicted pedophile Roman Polanski made a classic movie all about that in the 70s, a few years before he did that shit that made him a convicted pedophile, which is what he is. Anyway, Laura is still unconvinced. MacGyver asks to talk to the agent who conducted the environmental tests for the Bartlett Company, but then they're interrupted by this suspicious-looking waiter who's like, "Hey, are you MacGyver? You've got a phone call. You can take it in the back room." Shockingly, it turns out there is no phone call, only a gang of local working-class tough guys with pool cues who are mad at MacGyver for wanting to shut down the development and cost them their jobs. MacGyver tries to MacGyver his way out of this sticky situation by spraying powder in all their faces, grabbing a pool cue, and kicking all their asses for about 10 seconds. Then they gang up on MacGyver and knock him out. Oh well, he held his own for a little bit there. He's not Batman. Mac wakes up on the pool table after the commercial, and Laura walks in like, "Hey, what happened to you? Looks like you got your Enviro head kicked in." Laura denies knowing anything about the gang that beat up MacGyver, though she does say that word gets around fast in a small town like this, and, shit happens. Laura suggests that MacGyver take the hint and get lost, but he's like, "How about I talk to the agent who conducted your environmental tests instead? Like I'm gonna let some rednecks with pool cues stop me from protecting the environment. What kind of enviro head would I be if I did that?" Later, MacGyver returns to the development site in time to catch the end of Old Man Bartlett's big pitch to the investors. He's like, "Bartlett City's gonna be awesome. It's gonna have houses and roads and schools and a mall and a roller coaster and a racetrack and plenty of water for everybody forever." Laura notices MacGyver and tips her dad off. Old Man Bartlett's like, "Watch this shit," and he calls the whole party over to gather around a water cooler. He says, "Yeah, check it out. This water is from our very own artesian wells. Say, Mr. MacGyver, why don't you have some? There's plenty more where that came from." And MacGyver steps in like, "Thanks for the setup, chump. There won't be plenty more water once you build your city and move 15,000 people in here. Duh." Bartlett's like, "Can we talk in private real quick?" He and MacGyver move off to the side, with Scott pretending to do something in the background. They argue over whose environmental study is correct, and then Bartlett says, "Hey, MacGyver, why are you trying to destroy me?" MacGyver says, "I'm trying to save you from a major debacle. In between the last scene and this one, I talked to the guy who ran your environmental study. He manipulated the results to make it look like the aquifer wouldn't be threatened by your development." Bartlett's like, "Well, I've got permits, so we're building my city, and this conversation is over. Maybe you should enviro head on out of here." MacGyver mentions that the agent who ran the test recently got a spiffy new car, implying that he was bribed to fudge the results. Bartlett's like, "Hey man, I'm just trying to build a city here, okay? Can you cut me some slack and let me build my city? With my name on it, please? What will it take to get rid of you?" MacGyver says, "Take a ride with me. There's something about 40 miles away from here that I want to show you." Bartlett agrees, so MacGyver comes back later, picks up Bartlett, and they drive out to Willis's wasteland from the beginning of the episode. This represents a threat to the evil plans of Laura and Scott because it turns out their shitty dad is the good guy, relatively speaking. After MacGyver and their dad leave, Laura and Scott talk over the situation. Laura's like, "This MacGyver is bad news for us. Suppose he convinces Dad to run another test on the development site. Suppose he finds out we paid off that guy to fix the results of the first test." Scott, who has gone full-on soap opera villain now, is like, "Don't worry about MacGyver or Dad. They won't be a problem for us anymore." See, the thing is, even though it turns out he's apparently less evil than his children, Old Man Bartlett is still a terrible father who treats his kids like shit, always threatening to cut them off from financial support, bullying them into living how he thinks they should live, and they, particularly Scott, are sick and tired of it. Laura is still having doubts about their plan, but Scott tells her that it's too late. He attached a bomb to MacGyver's van, and once the last 2 digits on the odometer roll over to 55, kaboom! So it's like speed, only not speed. Distance. Doesn't have quite the same ring, does it? MacGyver and Bartlett are driving through the wasteland on their way to the lab. Bartlett actually seems disturbed by the sight of the environmental ruin around him. MacGyver's getting through to him. Then the odometer's last 2 numbers hit 55 and the bomb goes off, blowing the van off the road and sending it skidding into the wasteland where it comes to a halt upside down and on fire. Oh no! Regaining consciousness after the commercial, MacGyver gets himself and Old Man Bartlett to safety just as the van explodes. Bartlett has a busted leg, which MacGyver bandages using pieces of Bartlett's coat. They limp their way across the wasteland toward the testing lab, but they only make it so far when Bartlett has to stop. His leg injury is losing him a lot of blood. MacGyver is getting ready to go on by himself to call for help when Bartlett notices how quiet the night is in this wasteland. He can't even hear crickets. That's because there aren't any, MacGyver tells him. The whole place is dead. "Is this what you think I do?" Bartlett asks MacGyver. MacGyver's answer: "I think you're like a lot of people. You can't see the trees because you're too busy cutting down the forest." Yeah, good line, MacGyver. You really nailed him with that one. MacGyver goes off to gather supplies to build a fire to keep Bartlett warm after he leaves. Plenty of dead wood available, I guess. Then we cut to Scott and Laura driving through the wasteland looking for the blown-up van to confirm that their dad and MacGyver are dead. Scott's fancy little sports car gets stuck in the mud, so Scott insists they continue on foot. We cut back to the improvised campsite MacGyver has set up. He's started a fire, managing to gather wood from the wasteland without sinking into one of those bottomless mud holes that almost claimed Willis at the beginning. Bartlett's moment of clarity has expanded to encompass the realization that the bomb on the van could have been planted by one of his kids. He doesn't really believe it, though. "My kids are winners. They're part of me. I started out with nothing but built myself up into something strong. I'm not a wasteland MacGyver." It almost sounds like he believes it. We pick up Scott and Laura as they continue their walk in search of the van. Laura is really sounding like she's not comfortable with this whole planting a bomb on their father's automobile and then driving out to the middle of nowhere to make sure he's dead scenario, while Scott reveals that he's got a gun and that he's willing to do whatever it takes. Should Laura be worried? MacGyver reaches the testing lab. Willis is away, meeting with some environmental big shots in Washington. Hopefully he won't mind MacGyver using his stuff. Mac calls for help on the radio, but he gets no answer. He checks the radar and finds that there's a storm in the area, blocking the radio signal. But old man Bartlett is losing blood. He needs help. What's MacGyver gonna do? He looks around. He notices a wind tunnel with a big old fan at the end of it. He notices that he's in a tent. That's right, MacGyver. You know what you have to do. Scott and Laura have reached the wreck of the van. They can't help but notice that neither their father nor MacGyver is anywhere around. Scott in particular seems alarmed at the absence of horribly mangled bodies. Well, sure, when you really work yourself up to see something, it's understandable that you're a little disappointed to miss out. Fortunately, their father has thoughtfully left a blood trail for them to follow. MacGyver continues assembling his ridiculous contraption while old man Bartlett dozes by the dwindling fire, then wakes up from a nightmare. "It's okay, man. It was only a bad dream. You're fine." Slowly bleeding to death from a broken leg in the middle of an ecologically devastated region created by the exact same kind of development you're planning to do. Just relax. MacGyver reaches the cut sections out of the tent phase of his build. With how long they're taking to show you the construction process, you just know this one is going to be an all-timer, don't you? Scott and Laura locate the old man. Scott takes off his gloves before he grabs his gun, just to make sure he leaves fingerprints on the murder weapon. I think his father is right about him. He's kind of a dumbass. They confront their father, and Scott admits to planting the bomb and really tells his dad off. Old man Bartlett is like, "Why would you do this? Who taught you how to do this stuff?" "You, all right. I learned it from watching you." Laura tries to force Scott to put the gun down, but he shoves her aside. "Hey, I just noticed, is she wearing the same outfit as Deborah, MacGyver's hired assassin girlfriend?" Pretty close. It's a good outfit. Anyway, the old man is like, "Scott, I can change. Let's work this out." Scott's like, "Working it out doesn't work for me," and he pulls the trigger. MacGyver's almost ready. He's got that big wind tunnel fan strapped to his back. He's got his helmet on, and he's got the parachute he fashioned out of the sections of tent he cut out. Let's get this fucking absurd show on the road. Or should I say, off the ground. I know I said earlier that MacGyver's not Batman, but I never saw Batman build himself a flying parachute from shit he just found lying around in a mobile testing lab. I bet money Adam West's Batman would be able to do it, but he never did. As MacGyver flies his fantastic flying contraption off into the night, old man Bartlett suffers from the gunshot wound he just received. Laura tries again to intervene, but Scott grabs her and pulls her back. Scott's about to finish the old man off, but Laura goes for the gun. They struggle, the gun goes off, you've seen this a million times. Laura gets shot and drops dead instantly. Scott's a little upset by the death of his sister, but he blames it on his father and gets set to feed the old man some more lead. But then, look! Up in the sky! It's a bird! No, wait, it can't be. All the birds are dead. It's the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen on this show, and holy shit, does that cover some ground. MacGyver goes in low, and Scott helpfully stands there, neither moving nor shooting, just keeping perfectly still like a pro wrestler waiting to catch a diving opponent. Christ, I hate that shit. So that MacGyver can swoop in and kick him over. Then, just in case things haven't gotten goofy enough for you yet, MacGyver swings around, comes back for a second pass, and picks up Old Man Bartlett with his legs and flies away with him locked in a body scissors. They disappear into the night, Scott shooting at them but missing until he runs out of ammo. Back from commercial, Old Man Bartlett is holding a little press conference in his office. It seems that Scott has been arrested for the death of his sister. Bartlett calls the death of Laura an accident and says he's going to stand by Scott. "He's my son," Bartlett says. He also says that he's decided to abandon the Bartlett City project based on the latest information he's received from the Phoenix Foundation. He's currently looking for a more suitable building site. We pull back to reveal that MacGyver and Willis are watching from the doorway. Willis is like, "I knew you'd get through to him, MacGyver. How'd you do it?" And MacGyver's like, "I rescued him from his murderous son by spontaneously constructing a powered parachute from at-hand materials and flying him to safety." Ha ha! Okay, but what did you really do? Bartlett ends the press conference by announcing that he's setting up a trust in memory of his daughter Laura to fund a local family counseling center to prevent other parents from being so shitty that their kids grow up and try to murder them. Willis turns to MacGyver like, "What do you think?" And MacGyver says, "He's trying. That's all we can ask of anyone now." 35 years ago, and MacGyver had already figured out that the most we can hope for from the rich is to traumatize them into belatedly treating their loved ones better and not wantonly destroying the natural world. Truly a man ahead of his time. Frequently throughout this video series, I have talked about how some MacGyver episodes are surprisingly good. Underneath the action-adventure show silliness, there's a solidly constructed plot, or a clever twist, or a good performance from a guest star. This isn't one of those episodes. I should stress, I love this episode. From start to finish, I love this episode. But is this one of the MacGyvers that is secretly good? Not really. This is one of the MacGyvers that is perfectly, delightfully bad all the way through, and that's what makes it great. Right from the beginning, we know we're in for a good, dumb time. MacGyver finding an audio cassette filled with exposition taped to the sign at the edge of the wasteland? That's a clue. Cutting to Willis, who is continuing to monologue on his own out in the field. I guess he's supposed to be recording a log for his testing or something, but his log apparently consists of equal parts hard data and earnest, righteously indignant editorializing. Not that I blame him. By the way, you might not recognize him without the beard, but that is Bruce Harwood as Willis. Harwood is best known as Byers, one of the lone gunmen on The X-Files. And I know I said this episode isn't distinguished by good performances from its guest stars, but that's not a knock on Harwood or anyone else. These characters aren't written for good performances, as we might conventionally judge something like that. Harwood gives the right performance as Willis, just like Jim McMullen does as Old Man Bartlett, and John Piper Ferguson and Mitzi Capture do as Scott and Laura, respectively. Piper Ferguson and Capture are especially fun as Bartlett's scheming, resentful kids. The dynamic between them and their father is great. He's a bastard, and they're even bigger bastards, but only because their bastard of a father raised them to be such great big bastards. It's all wonderfully soapy, isn't it? Then, of course, there's their diabolical plan to wrest control of the family company from their father, which makes no sense to me at all. Okay, so if I've got this right, the plan is to let Bartlett build his development on a site which Scott and Laura know is unsuitable and will eventually degrade into a disaster area like the wasteland, and then Bartlett will be forced to resign from the company, and Scott and Laura can claim their birthright and take over, except After the company is revealed to be responsible for an environmental disaster, what do Scott and Laura think is going to be left for them to take over? I know history is full of examples of big companies that are found to have committed terrible crimes but end up getting away with it, but A, Bartlett's company doesn't seem that big, all things considered, and B, if Willis and MacGyver are right, the ensuing disaster won't just turn the new Bartlett City development into a wasteland, it will also claim the nearby town of Maple Ridge, which has apparently been there for a while and has a decent-sized population of its own. What do Scott and Laura reckon their family construction company is going to be worth after it's not only found to be responsible for the environmental devastation of an entire area and rendering 2 towns uninhabitable, but it's also sued into oblivion by the former residents of those 2 former towns? It doesn't seem like they've really thought this thing through. Scott and Laura's relationship to each other is mostly an off-the-rack good sibling, bad sibling arrangement, though they're both bad siblings, so it's more like a bad sibling, worse sibling deal, I guess. Laura is just as complicit in planning to allow her father to cause an environmental catastrophe for, theoretically, personal gain as her brother, but she at least has enough of a conscience to start having second thoughts about it. Granted, her conscience isn't triggered by guilt over the damage the Bartlett City development will bring about, but rather by loyalty to her shitty father, but it's more than we see from Scott. It obviously wasn't the original intent of the creators, but it's difficult to watch this episode now and not see a bit of the Trump kids in Scott and Laura, with Laura as the still evil but somewhat competent sister, and Scott as the fuck-up dipshit son who nevertheless feels entitled to inherit the family empire. Is Scott Don Jr. or Eric? I don't know. It doesn't make a difference. Take your pick. Also, I know it's not a perfect comparison because Old Man Bartlett makes a poor stand-in for Trump, what with him seeming to actually care about his kids in the end and possessing the capacity to learn and change his mind based on new information. Definitely not Trump-like qualities. The presence of both Scott and Laura, and the tension between them over whether or not to go through with their plan to ruin the old man, isn't strictly necessary for the plot of the episode. If there had been only one sibling, the story could have moved along in more or less the same way, with maybe a few minor tweaks. Having 2 scheming evil kids instead of 1 only serves to up the soap opera quotient, giving us melodramatic beats like Scott accidentally shooting and killing Laura and then immediately blaming it on his father. Speaking of the plot, it's about as formulaic as it gets. MacGyver makes trouble for the bad guys. They try to scare MacGyver off. It doesn't work. MacGyver invents a thing to resolve a final crisis and a hopeful denouement to wrap things up. Things click along from one expected beat to the next. Shit happens as dictated by formula, even when it winds up going nowhere in this story, like MacGyver getting beaten up by a gang of tough guys who think he's there to take their jobs. It happens. It's over. It makes no difference. MacGyver continues his efforts to stop the development anyway, and after MacGyver leaves the billiards room in the back of that restaurant, it's never mentioned again. Hey, when he got beaten up by a bunch of guys with pool sticks but refused to leave town, was that when MacGyver missed his cue? You can't stop me from saying anything I want. Most of what I love about this episode is of the campy, ironic, so bad it's good variety, but on a sincere note, I do genuinely appreciate the environmental message. Willis's monologuing may be dramatic and heavy-handed, and a few of MacGyver's comebacks to Old Man Bartlett and Laura are cringe-inducingly on the nose, but it was a necessary message back then, and it's a necessary message now. We, and by we I mostly mean our governments and corporations, have done a terrible job of taking care of planet Earth, and the results are harmful to everyone and everything on the planet. As goofy as this show is, I often wish there were more shows today that wore their progressive social and political values, including environmentalism, as openly and unashamedly as MacGyver. But The most appealing thing about this episode is not the cookie-cutter plot or the soap opera antics of Scott and Laura, or even the power of the combined pure-hearted do-gooderism of MacGyver and Willis. The real hook of this episode is MacGyver taking what feels like a few minutes to construct a working, powered paraglider out of spare parts. It's just tremendous. I'm not going to say that it's the greatest MacGyverism of the series, because there's a lot of competition there. It's not even my own personal favorite, but it's one that speaks to the essential charm of the show. MacGyver is known for coming up with creative solutions to problems. That's the premise. But this one is nuts, even by his usual standard. Remember, when he starts building the paraglider, MacGyver doesn't know that Scott and Laura are nearby hunting for their father. When he's almost finished with the glider, he hears the gunshot in the distance and realizes that things are worse than he thought they were. But before he starts the build, as far as MacGyver knows, the situation is that old man Bartlett has an injured leg and is losing blood and needs to be gotten to a hospital as soon as possible. And calling for outside help isn't an option because the radio can't get through that nearby storm. So naturally, after looking around the tent for about 10 or 20 seconds, MacGyver decides, I know, I'll just whip up a quick powered parachute to fly us out of here. Who thinks like that? Even MacGyver seems to realize how bonkers it is. He has that moment where he pauses and shakes his head in disbelief at what he's about to do. The audacity of it. Not merely to have MacGyver do it, but to do it in such a short amount of time and to have it work so perfectly right away, work so well that not only does the machine successfully fly MacGyver around, it also flies MacGyver and Bartlett at the same time. Not only is MacGyver able to build the thing, and not only does it work, he knows how to fly it. I know MacGyver is a man of many talents. I just never assumed precision flying of a homemade paraglider was one of them. But I mean, why would I assume that? Why would anyone assume that about anyone? That's fucking preposterous. And what do you think went through Bartlett's mind when he looked up and saw that flying toward him? Thank God I'm saved? Probably more like, oh great, now what the fuck is that? But I'm sure soon enough Bartlett was feeling grateful. He was shown the error of his ways regarding the environmental impact of the Bartlett City development, and he was rescued from the wrath of his gun-wielding son. As he was carried away in the grip of those two powerful legs, surely Bartlett realized that he'd have been a goner were it not for MacGyver and his biggest fan. I told you, there's nothing you can do about it.